Um, so I'd like to call the meeting to order and read the roll.
Senator Chambers Armstrong. Here. Senator Wise.
Present.
Representative All.
Here.
Representative Hodgson.
Here.
Okay.
Co-Chair Williams.
Here.
Co-Chair Pratt.
Oh, very good. Do I hear a motion for the approval of the meeting minutes from October 10th?
Motion.
Second. Okay, moved in second without objection. Approved. Okay. Okay, today we're really here. I think we're going to talk a lot about broadband deployment, but one of the objectives of this committee is governance, and we're just going to hear some testimony on governments. We're going to have the PVAs come up and talk about the governments, and then we'll get into the broadband and have Pat. So if are we ready to go with Doug Robinson? Welcome, Doug. If you could introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your organization from NCSL.
No.
Oh, whoops.
Yes, will do, Senator Williams, and thank you and members of the committee for inviting NASCIO to provide some commentary today and some perspectives on the state chief information officers. I'm the executive director of NASCIO, the National Association of State Chief Information Officers. We're the organization that represents the state CIOs and IT executives in state government and the executive branch across 53 states, territories, and the District of Columbia. We also represent the chief information security officers and the state chief privacy officers with communities of practice, and we support both those groups. So it's my pleasure to be here today and talk about state IT governance and state IT organization and the role of the state CIO. My remarks today are going to be supported by particularly our most recent studies and research. One of the roles of the association is to produce surveys, studies, and research each year, and we produce quite a bit of that, focusing on various aspects of the state CIO organization. And doing that, we capture information about the overall structure, their governance, their funding, the role of the state CIO. So I will be essentially presenting you with empirical evidence from our last couple of national surveys and studies on the state CIO, so you can kind of be able to compare and contrast that. So if you'll indulge me here, I'll go ahead and share my screen, and you have the materials, I believe, in front of you in hard copy, but if not, we'll go ahead and go through that. And I'll provide kind of the background. So again, we represent the state CIOs across the United States. I will start with one very important set of data, and that is our state CIO top 10 priorities. Each year since 2006, we have essentially asked our state CIOs through a forced choice ballot to vote on their top 10 priorities for the next upcoming calendar year. We'll in fact be releasing the top 10 priorities for 2024 later this week, so this is very timely. This is the 2023 data, and again, you can compare and contrast that with what's going on in the Commonwealth, but not surprising, security and risk management has been number one. It has been number one for 10 consecutive years. So it is top of mind for our state CIO and our state agencies that are involved in, obviously, information technology. This is a critically important time around the discussion of governance, because cybersecurity is really a technology, has always been viewed as a technology issue, and quite frankly, it's really around a business risk issue. So I think we want to look at technology across all of these spectrums, but digital government, digital services, and workforce are two that have really risen to the top of the top 10 in the last couple of years. I think that is a function of what happened during COVID and during the pandemic, with the expansion of digital services and really the dissatisfaction of citizens around their experience. And that's clearly the case with legacy modernization. So again, if you look at this, that's a really good snapshot of an aggregation of 50 state CIOs and what they thought. And again, you're going to talk about broadband later today. Broadband has been in the top 10 for many, many years. Although many state CIOs don't have direct responsibility for broadband any longer, it's under a commissioner or maybe under economic development, but that's been certainly a hot topic for the state CIOs. So state chief information officers. Every state, territory, and the District of Columbia has a state chief information officer for the executive branch. These individuals are now all appointed. They're all appointed positions, so they're at-will employees, and they currently serve in that capacity in a variety of reporting roles and structures. And I'll get to that in a minute, but this is, again, a generalization of the typical roles of the state CIO. And what's become, I think, evident over the last 10 years or so is the elevation of that role and really the changing nature of what 20 years ago was really thought of as an infrastructure services organization, an internal service bureau that ran the mainframe and ran servers and applications, and the network, particularly around data and telephony, has now expanded into a much broader portfolio, really taking on the role of the lead executive for information technology within state government, taking on things like enterprise portfolio management, which has become very, very important. BRM, business relationship management, with their agencies, but their customers, but also with their partners in the private sector, their vendors, with local governments, and that has become much more expansive. So again, this is typically what we would describe as the general roles and responsibilities of the state CIO. In all the states, these are memorialized in statute. So this position has been, again, created in statute, depending on the organizational model, which we'll get to in a moment about where they report. But again, this is a common set of activities that we see from the state CIOs. So the question on the table that you asked was around governance and organization. And here, as I think represented in a pictorial, is a visualization of the governance models across the state, which is really a spectrum from one extreme to the other in terms of how they are organized. NASCIO has been tracking this for about the last 25 years, and what we've seen is clearly a different approach depending on the state, but a general trend towards more consolidation, more optimization of the environment, more unification of services, particularly across the infrastructure. And by that, I mean, again, the network services, the mainframe services, those services that are typically delivered by a central IT organization under the leadership of the CIO. So these services have moved, again, from the spectrum of decentralization, meaning all of the agencies ran all of their own IT operations. In some states, there were dozens of mainframes, and that has clearly not the case today as we move to more cloud services, software as a service, and other modern service delivery channels. You're going to see the states move towards more consolidation with more centralized planning, policy, perhaps with some agency autonomy, but the trend for the last decade has certainly been towards a higher degree of consolidation. We have reported on this in multiple studies, which certainly you can review on the NASCIO website, going back several years, where we looked at overall consolidation, and we looked most recently at data center consolidation in 2017, and then further aspects of that most recently in some of our most recent studies looking at how states are organized. But the general trend has been toward more of the consolidation of the infrastructure, consolidation of the services, perhaps consolidation of applications and application development. And if you look all the way on the one extreme, as I have unified, we have a number of states, a small number of states, what I kind of characterize those as the unification model. All of the infrastructure, all of the services, all of the applications, and I think most critically, all of the IT employees actually report to the CI organization. There are a number of states where the CI organization is quite large, and all of the IT employees, although they may be located in a state agency within those lines of business in the executive branch, those individuals actually report to the state CI organization. We see that today in states like New York, Tennessee, Oklahoma, Minnesota, and a few others where that's a very strong unification model. They made the deliberate decision to go to that approach. So you can compare and contrast the Commonwealth with Tennessee and their strategic technology services, where their central IT organization has almost 1,300 employees, but they provide a full range of services across the board for all of their state agencies. So again, my comment here, as I've spoken to many groups and testified before legislative bodies in years, is this: if you've seen one state, you've seen one state. So you can generalize around these organizational and governance models. However, there is no one silver bullet. There isn't a optimal organization. It really depends on the state. Many states are quite successful with a federated model, where the agencies take on some of the responsibility for their business applications. Perhaps they want to support their technology. They have their own application developers. They have their own help desk. And that suits them very well, and they're successful in that model. And the CIO organization provides perhaps some of the critical core services, and they may provide the network and other activities that are critical. Cybersecurity is a really good example of a set of requirements and tools and resources and capabilities that is often delivered from the central IT organization or from the CIO organization. And that's become very prominent across the states, where cybersecurity has really been centralized within the CIO organization because of the need to dramatically reduce risks across the state agencies of the executive branch. So again, the state CIOs are not responsible for technology support or deployment within the judicial or legislative branches, but they in fact often serve other constitutional officers and particularly local governments. Many of our state CIOs provide services to local governments through a variety of master price contracts and service delivery options. So they make those offerings available, and the most prominent ones are around cybersecurity and network services. This gives you a good snapshot of the range. There's nuances between each of these. And again, most of the states are more consolidated today, and they continue to consolidate. And that's particularly around their infrastructure and the reducing their infrastructure footprint. The other major activity that's going on around this is the mainframe. And we now have about more than a dozen states that have moved to mainframe as a service, including the Commonwealth, which means that the mainframe is no longer a physical infrastructure device located in a data center. It's actually serviced by a third-party off-premise provider. And I think you're going to see more and more states move to that model for a variety of reasons, particularly one of just capital investment and overall skills in the workforce. They are almost forced to move to a model where they are using outside services to support their mainframe requirements. The mainframe is still an important platform for states. It's still critical for many states. But they had to come to a more cost-effective and efficient model to do that. And again, that is essentially having a outsourced third party take care of their mainframe services. So we're going to see more of that. And I think the next iteration, if you're looking at trends around technology organization, will be state CIOs and others, particularly the state CIOs, looking to move out of their state-owned data center and go to a co-location opportunity with the private sector, because many state data centers have been shrinking in the past 10 years due to virtualization and the reduced need for the large equipment that they once had in their data center. So many state data centers, in fact, have a much larger footprint than that they need. So there's your governance model, and then let's look at the reporting models. I know this is of interest perhaps to the board as well. And again, this is a split opportunity right here to look at the states where the CIO reports to the governor, is a cabinet secretary, and where the CIO reports to an agency head. And you can see it's almost a split. This is constantly in motion. We have two states, Mississippi and Texas, where the CIO reports to a board, an information technology board, of individuals appointed by the governor. And in some cases, they have both representatives from the executive branch, the legislative branch, and private sector organizations, and they serve on those boards. This reporting model is in constant flux. We haven't seen dramatic changes in the last 20 years to this, but we constantly see states that move from one to the other, and depending on the administration and depending on Obviously, the will of the new administration coming in, since the CIOs often change with the gubernatorial change, we see these shifts. Most recently, in the last 2 to 3 years, both Utah and California were previously cabinet level individuals running that organization, and new governors came in and made the decision to move the CI organization back underneath a Department of Administration. Most recently, Iowa and Nevada, which were formerly reporting to a Department of Administration, had statutory and legislative changes that moved those organizations out from under a department and put them into a governor's cabinet level. So we see that across the board, and we see that in motion across the states.
Excuse me, can I?
Yes,
So,
sir. Mhm.
so we got a big agenda today. We need to move on. This has been great.
Yeah.
Let me ask you a quick question here. Is the trend one way or the other, or is it just switching back and forth when you're talking about the trends? I mean, from direct report to the governor or cabinet level reports?
Yes, Senator. About 20 years ago, the trend was clearly towards the secretary or the governor reporting. We saw a lot of states move in the late 90s to moving to a level, including Kentucky, where it was it was a cabinet level secretary and under the governor. And we see states today that like New Mexico and North Carolina, Maryland, and several others, where the CIO actually has a secretary designation. Their title is Secretary of Technology and State CIO. So after 2000 or so, that movement stabilized, sir. And so we know we've basically seen just minor changes, one or two every few years, but it is not trending in one strong direction or another at this point.
Good. And because of our time limitation, could we move over to how the CIO organizations is funded throughout the states? That's one of our main tasks, is for 2 years from now to be dealing with the funding on that.
Yes. So let's look at that, sir. So how's the organization funding? This is data we collected in our 2023 survey. So it is very contemporary. As you can see, the common model, which has been the model for the last 30 to 40 years for Internal Service Bureau, for the state CIO, has been a chargeback or a direct billing to agencies. So 90% of the states today have a chargeback function. What we've seen in the last decade, though, is a shift to also providing general funds. And by that, I mean that the states predominantly rely on chargeback, but as you can see, there's also more than almost 2/3 of the states now actually have a component of the chargeback to support that through general funds appropriation. So this tends to be the preferred model. This hybrid model tends to be the preferred model for state CIOs, where they have a service catalog of available services. They charge their state agencies and others for those services, and they also receive an appropriation to cover the overhead. This has been a point of tension for many, many years, is the fact that that 100% chargeback model does not allow for innovation, flexibility. It does make the rates a little bit higher because they are including the overhead functions from the state CIO organization into those rates. So if you are able to sanitize those and fund those out of the general fund, that has been the trend, and you can see that. And I think this will continue to grow. A small number of states use an agency assessment, or they have all general funds, but again, you can see that's a relatively small number in comparison to the chargeback. So that's kind of the trend, is moving away from 100%. We have about 10 states today that are 100% chargeback or service billing to the agencies. That's how they're funded.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I want to open it up to the committee. If we have any questions, we're going to have to move on. We've got quite a bit. And this is just the beginning for us. I mean, this is really just an opening. Governance is what we'll be looking at over the next couple of years. So are there any questions from the committee? Very good. Well, thank you very much for the introduction to this. Is a lot of information. I'm sure we'll have a much more detailed committee meeting later in the future. But we would like to bring to the table now an organization that I think has been caught between the governance schedule, the PVAs. They've sort of been bounced around back and forth on that. And we'd just like to take a few minutes to talk about their needs, talk about the history of how we're bounced back and forth between a couple different cabinets. So, and their needs as they're a state agency, they're out there at the edge, or they're a local agency. We're not quite sure how that works, but we found a lot of agencies that aren't even really state agencies. The county clerks, municipalities that get a lot of services from the state, and we have to be able to deal with them. The PVAs, Doug, if you're, or excuse me, I see Doug's up there, but who's going to speak first? Come on up to the table. There we go. And while they're coming up, I neglected to give anybody the opportunity to introduce anybody. Or, quite frankly, I have been in the legislature this is my second life. I've been here for, I think, 10 years almost now. I've never chaired a committee. So this is my inaugural committee chair. Thank you very much. But, gentlemen, if you would proceed.
Good morning. Thank you. I'm David O'Neill of Fayette County PVA and president of the PVA Association.
I'm Dustin Billings. I'm the executive director of the PVA Association.
I'm Blake Robertson, the Owen County PVA.
Thank you very much. If you would like to discuss some of the issues and the history of going back and forth and some of the issues that we've discussed.
Okay, maybe just a couple motherhood issues. So PVAs get their funding from three sources, two primary sources. One of them is all of our salaries and our benefits are provided by the state through the general fund and the biennium budgeting process. Our operational budget, which is basically everything that's required to run our office other than salaries and benefits, is laid out in statute and is put to the fiscal court in the cities. Based on the size of the county. Mm-hmm. And then the third source of income is through the sale of data or subscriptions to our website, which in certain times when budgets are tighter than others, that source of income can play a very important part in the success of an office and being able to run their office effectively. I can speak for Fayette County as the second largest county. Of the appropriations that I get at the local level, which is about $420,000 a year, about 70% of that goes towards IT. The largest expense is what's referred to as a CAMA system, computer-aided mass assessing, and all of our offices have some level of software that they use to manage the modeling that helps us place value on property as well as act as a database. So, I have 113,000 properties in Fayette County, and I have to keep a record of a snapshot of what the tax roll looked like in every single year and characteristics on all the improvements of the property, and that takes a fairly significant database to manage that, and that expense can be anywhere from $100,000 to $150,000 a year, depending on how much consultancy we bring in to help us with the modeling. So in an office my size, I have a staff of about 20 people. Everybody has a computer and monitors and printers and the usual stuff you would find in an office, but also to run a CAMA system and to network all those computers together, we have to have maybe a half a dozen servers. So it's important that we have an IT person on site in our office at all times. So maybe Blake could explain to you a little bit about a smaller county.
Big government. Small. We got the gamut and the man in the middle deals with them all. Okay.
Absolutely. So for Owen County, it honestly is exactly like David on just such a smaller scale. So in my county, we have roughly 9,800 parcels, and our appropriations from the county, I think we get roughly around $24,000 a year, and then from our city, it's like $2,500, and that's to run my whole office. Again, we have to have a tax roll data system. We pay for our website. We pay for all those things as well. Not near on the scale that David pays, but we receive so much less, and we have to pay that out. We have to pay for our own internet, things like that. Our staff, there were years David's talking about, I can remember just 4 years ago, even I had to go without a part-time staff member because of funding, because it saved the office money. So we've had a couple good years budgetarily in the recent years, but if things slip back to that, I'm looking at cutting employees, or it's just that thin of a line right now for us. Any funding helps, but that is kind of like where we're at as an office in paying for our technology, and it's a razor thin line.
Very good. Dustin, in general, from I guess you've sort of been back and forth over the last couple of years in terms of governance from the who you report to and how you get your service. Could you tell us where you've been and where you are now and where you'd like to go?
Yes, up until about 2012, we had a central IT department that was on the fourth floor of revenue. They serviced all the PVAs. Any PVA that needed help, you called them directly. They took care. Well, they done away with that, and we started having some issues with COT because we are 120 different counties. We go from very small budget up to Jefferson County, which has one of the largest budget. So what we found was that some of the smaller counties couldn't afford the COT, the hourly wage. We actually have some counties that have less than a $5,000 budget. So you take a 5-hour COT, I mean, you're talking about, close to 1/10 of their budget for the year just to come in and to solve a problem that they have. So, well, in July, the Department of Revenue has reinstated our IT department, and that has been probably one of the greatest helps that the smaller counties have had. Now the larger counties, and there are some counties that have their own IT people that they serve as deputies, but they're they're capable to handle the IT stuff. So they're very fortunate in that situation. So, but going back to the IT department that the fourth floor, the Department of Revenue has given us, has been beneficial beyond belief to about 70 plus counties.
Very good. And I know one of the bones of contention, or how you make revenue, and how the rest of the state, between you and the rest of the state, is the cost of. You have the parcel data, and that has gone back and forth over the history. And I think you've received some money for technology, but you receive a lot of money for cellular parcels.
Yes.
Okay.
The money we received from the general fund, which was very appreciated, it was $3.1 million, helped supply new computers to a lot of counties. I was in Powell County for 14 years, and when I got rid of a computer, I would send it over to Menifee County, which was even a smaller county. They would take an 8 or 9 year old computer and utilize it. And with this money that we just recently received, we were able to go in and upgrade a lot of computers, just a lot of hardware type stuff, tablets and things that monitors, printers and things that each office needed that couldn't afford it over time, or it wasn't, I didn't get done with it, or mine was terrible and I had to throw it away, and Jim didn't get it over in Menifee County. So the $3.1 million was very appreciated. So.
Very good. but that's just one-time funds?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
May I make a distinction?
Yes,
I wanted to
please.
make a distinction on going back to the funding a little bit. So, in a particularly bad budget year, when funds are cut from the general fund from the legislature, that is 100% salary and benefits, right? So we can't cut back on office supplies and that type thing. The only way that money goes to is salaries and benefits. So we handle the budget collectively as an association along with the Department of Revenue. So in a particularly bad year where there is a budget cut, we won't lay people off because we believe we are right-sized, or at least minimally right-sized. What we'll do instead is we'll repurpose the funds that we receive locally and reimburse the Department of Revenue for the salaries that we did not take layoffs. So again, that just goes to explain how important our miscellaneous funds can be in filling that gap. So I know there has been a little bit of a push recently to more centralized GIS data as an example. And so I think that we need to be cautious that as we move that centrally, move that to the state, that we keep the local offices whole on the money that they would collect if they were to sell the data.
Right.
I'm agreeing.
Yeah, great. Okay, so I think the situation here is you bounce back and forth. You're much happier than you were before, but we still have funding issues that we're going to have to deal with because this was one-time money you got for technology, and one thing, technology marches on. The state agencies have some issues with having to buy data 2 or 3 times from you all. And the interesting thing is it's not really that much money. I think of when the state say took over the tickets from the local agencies, and then we funded the state jails. We may be in a situation here where we'd like to look at some sort of relationship where we could get the data, make it available if we funded your needs.
Senator, I think most of our counties, and I don't know about Blake or David, but I know if a state agency needed the data, it was given to them. We did not charge them in Powell counties. So I think the issue that's bigger on our is how this data is protected on a state level. You know, we do use it to fund our office. So if it were out there available to everybody, that, you know, then these outside companies wouldn't be buying the data from us. So I think it's more along those lines that we have an issue with, you know, sending it up to the state. I don't think we have an issue as long as it's protected and we can still use it to fund our offices, or we're fully funded, you know, from the state level.
Can you tell me the nature of the data that you sell to private companies?
Yes,
Is there any personal identifying characteristics in there?
No, mostly what we sell is like to escrow companies, mortgage, the bill files. We do sell some of the personal identifying because these hunting apps and stuff want to know boundaries and stuff. So we do sell our GIS shape files and stuff to these guys. CoreLogic is a major player in who we sell to. So I mean, they buy probably from all 120 counties. So yes, there are some personal identify. You know, who the owner, maybe the assessment. If there is a GIS in that county, a shape file to go along with their property boundaries or what we think might, you know, close to their property boundaries. Every county's different because you know, boundary lines are in Fayette County. You might have a plat for everything. In Powell County, we don't have a plat for everything. It goes to the mountainside, to the oak with a hack in it, and you know, so those boundary lines are very different in every county.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think this is an issue that is going to come back to the General Assembly, and technology, you are sort of a state agency, but you have a local component. But I think that from a technology standpoint, just like with the county clerks, we're going to have to provide you a more consistent ability to deal with what is increasingly an online and not a simple paperwork issue on that. So we're taking the information. We're looking forward to working with you this session, seeing what we can do to make the data available to the state and the funding available to you and not be so back and forth every year as it seems to have happened. Okay. Any other comments?
Thank you,
Thank
sir.
you all very much for your time, and I look to see, hopefully you'll have some action in this committee meeting.
Thank you.
Judge Covey, I appreciate your patience with us as we talk about some governance here. But I think your experience with the broadband deployment is going to be critical. We're on a tough time schedule moving forward, and so we've got to get things implemented. And from what I hear, if it wasn't for you, things may not have happened in a timely manner. But we'd appreciate hearing your story. And we have all the players here in the broadband deployment today listening to you, and this is not a gotcha on anybody. It's all about trying to get out of the gate and do what Scott County has done, get service to as many people as possible in the shortest time possible. So, Judge
Oh,
Cunningham.
it's a pleasure to be here and appreciate the opportunity to share. And my goal is to try to help other county leaders navigate this path as they go forward in broadband deployment. And the number one call, the number one email, stop me in the grocery store is the topic is broadband. And in rural Scott County in 2020, we didn't really know where we had coverage and where we didn't. And one of the most important things we did was engage a consultant, CTC consultants, to help guide us and kind of help us know what we didn't know. And they conducted a walkout, the whole county, every road, every street, and identified where there was infrastructure, where there was not infrastructure, and helped us put together a picture of where we were and what we needed. And from that, we identified about 5,500 homes in rural Scott County, right outside of Georgetown, that did not have, that were unserved and needed access. So important for telehealth, working from home, remote education, all those things that you all know is so important. And we put out an RFP with guidance from CTC, and then in July of 22, we accepted that RFP with Charter Spectrum, and started working together with them to navigate this. And from there, and it was really July of 21, accepted the bid, and then it took them about 3 or 4 months to finalize the agreement, and then they started working on their walkout. And it helped them to have the data that we had from CTC, but they had to verify all that themselves. So by the following May of 22, we started this process of submitting applications. And we had 7,862 poles in this project. And there's about 1,900 with Bluegrass Energy, about 1,400 with Owen Electric, and then about 4,500 with Kentucky Utilities. And by the fall of 22, we had submitted all of our poles for review and started asking and waiting for approvals. And just to be blunt and honest, it was as if we were writing a how-to book, and that first chapter really didn't have anything in it. And it was a slow go at that time. It was, I think we were plowing fresh ground and trying to navigate how to navigate a high-volume project and move forward. And go all the way to July of this year, we only had 35% of those polls that had been submitted approved. And at that point, I'm very thankful for KU, very thankful for Charter, Bluegrass Energy, and Owen Electric. We all sat down and we started having weekly update calls. Zoom calls didn't last 30 minutes. Mostly they were shorter than that, to be honest, but it helped put everybody around the table and try to lay everything out and help move us forward. And I'm very, very appreciative of KU and Charter and Bluegrass and Owen Electric, of their willingness to be collaborative and sit down. And from there, we have moved forward, and it's been like night and day between the first chapters of the project to now. And we're very close to getting, we have about 500 poles that are left that need approval for attachment. And it's, we're there. We're very optimistic about getting the thing done. But what I would recommend and what I would hope to see from this process, there's 4 things, and I think that would be helpful. Number one, when these type of high volume projects start, a holistic review with everyone, the pole owner, the provider, and the county government consultant, sitting down and really not submitting the poles for attachment, but looking at the scope of the whole project. I think that would be very, very helpful. Having everything laid out on a table and and everybody know, what's needed to be done. And then from there, number two, a collaborative effort to strategically streamline and accelerate the pole permitting process. It is like watching paint dry, to be quite honest. And there's a lot of work into it that people don't understand, and I don't, quite honestly, understand the whole scope. But every single pole has to be recorded, photographed, and then engineered. You look at the load on the pole, you look at the placement of the different attachments. It's all very detailed, and safety is a high priority on that, and don't want to downplay it. But when you submit at the start of this whole project, we can only submit about 300 poles at a time. Now, since then, KU has allowed up to 1,000 poles at a time, which has helped greatly. But it's just the mechanics of the process. The poles are submitted, and sometimes they wait in draft status. And then when they're reviewed, you have to identify what make-ready has to be done, what work has to be done, what poles have to be replaced. And then it's the logistic of those being identified, and then the pole owner letting the provider, the service provider, know what the charge is, verify that. Then the service provider has to send a check over. Then it's laborious. It just takes time. And what we have talked about on our calls, could there be a escrow account set up that estimates how much make ready has to be done, and then it be put into this account, and electronically requests be made for payment to speed things along. And that would be something to consider. And then from that point, if you could strategically accelerate the process and make sure that everybody is communicating. Continued communication is just so important in those ongoing meetings. I think that would help. And then from that point, one of the discussions that's really been a topic on our calls quite often is the discussion of temporary attachment in the comm area. And what that means is if you live on Philip Pratt Lane and there's 100 poles and one pole needs to be replaced, no work can be done until that pole's replaced, and it just holds things up. So the temp attachment has been a conversation, and I am 100% supportive of making sure safety is a priority. But if there was a way to navigate that, it could be very helpful for other counties moving forward. And I'm hopeful that there would be a way to safely do that in what they call the comm area to help navigate that forward, because the pole replacement, the pole make-ready work really holds up the process. And those are the four things, in my opinion, that would most be helpful in the whole process going forward. And we're not finished. We're very close. But, from when we're done, after we've identified some more poles, I think there'll be over 6,000 homes that were unserved in Scott County that will have access to high-speed broadband and will make a difference in their daily life. So I'm very appreciative of, since July, of the work that Spectrum and KU and Bluegrass Energy and Owen Electric, the collaborative effort since July has been a game changer for our county. And it's much appreciated, and I think it's a model that other counties can use going forward. And I'd be happy to try to answer questions. I don't want to hold you up all day, and I've tried to paint a picture, of our process and where we've been.
Thank you very much. And we have a question from Representative Pratt. Excuse me. Okay.
Thank you, sir. First of all, I want to say, should have got here and announced that you are my county judge. You are our guest today. Thank you, sir. Again, as we look at pole attachments and getting this out, Scott County did this on their own. They did it long before we started the process. Kudos to you. They were able to get chartered to kick in $18 million. County kicked in $3 million, which got a federal grant for. But we got 300 million that we put out a couple of years ago for broadband deployment, 20 million for pole attachment fees, which we're going to get to. But we just got $1.1 billion from the federal government to get broadband out in the state of Kentucky. These issues are not going away. And I'll be honest, I've had the discussion with the broadband providers, with the utilities, that if they could not get their act together on these pole attachments and how the fees and everything else, we were going to get involved. Unfortunately, it appears we are going to get involved in this, which means no one's going to be happy. But it's coming. The fact that we have 500 poles that you still can't attach to get broadband out to the underserved and unserved in Scott County it's not allowed. I'm sorry, we can't have this. So with that, if we're having these issues in Scott County, can you imagine when that $1.1 billion start rolling out? It's going to be a massive, and this is one-time money. If we screw this up, we're screwed. So we have to get it right, but it looks like we are going to get involved in it. And thank you for your leadership. By the way, Judge Covington did this on his own. I mean, he did it, rolled it out, did it all. But we have much
I've
more.
got a good physical court to work with too that saw the need. But Representative Pratt, this is not an exact science. And as we have gone along, you can do the work, and the walkout work that we did with CTC to have the data of our initial estimate of what we needed, what was served and what was not served. Even after that was used by Spectrum, there's still areas that we've kind of discovered that was, a left out street here, a left out little short subdivision. It's very challenging to cast that broad net and catch every fish in it. But since July, I can assure you that both our pole owners and our providers have worked collaboratively, and I would value their input as well, and hopefully their input could put together some guidelines that could serve as a model going forward without you all having to put into law directions that have to be followed. But since July, I do believe that it's been very productive, and the resources have been allocated to help move things along. Initially, they weren't there. That was a reality. But I do think since July that the resources have been allocated, and a collaborative spirit of moving things along have really helped. And I'm looking forward to hearing from our pole owners and our providers about recommendations of what they think. But I think those four things would really help. And if you could just streamline that pole permitting process a little bit and take out of some of the wait period, and then the discussion, is it safe to attach in the comm area when you need to replace a pole or need to do make ready work, I can't answer that. I'm not an engineer, but that is a major topic that slows down deployment. And my folks in Scott County, we announced this project way back, and we accepted the bid in July of 21, and then finalized the agreement with Spectrum in that fall. My people are anxious, and they are wearing me out, to be honest, because they want connectivity, and it's like water and electricity and telephone was years ago. Broadband is it's a need. It's not a want.
Yes. And I think I know that Senator Thayer is in the audience, and Representative Pratt, I know they had to back you up, but I don't think anybody in the legislature wants any other of their judge executives to have to go through what you went through to make this project happen. I know you had to call on them. I know you called on everybody to make it happen.
But I can't stress enough, too, that if there were monies to help counties with the cost of a consultant, that, I'm blind when it comes to starting this project. And I did my due diligence and found the right consultant in CTC, and they helped get us, and they have helped through the process. They helped me with the NTIA federal grant for $3 million. We would have not been able to do any of that without their guidance, and then getting us and kind of being the adult in the room, so to speak, helping us, get to the point where we could accept a bid and then try to implement the plan. And then since then, July, when we all sat down around a table and I just asked for help, KU, our pro owners, Charter Spectrum, they've not agreed at all times, but they've been agreeable and they've worked together. So I'm looking forward to hearing from them what they think as well could help. So
Yeah, very good. We're going to bring them up, and we appreciate you being the warm up act, because we've just got a couple $100 million in grants and some left, and we got $1 billion of grants. And if it wasn't for your experiences here, what we're going to hear about, so we can all work together, we will never be able to get that done in the next 5 years. So thank you very much for what you've done.
My pleasure. Thank you.
By the way, Judge Covington, it's not a Philip Pratt lane yet, but that's a great idea.
Very good. So, we open this meeting with Wichita alignment, okay? Because we have the pole owners, we've got the cable owners, okay? We've got all the parties, but none of it happens without the linemen, okay? So I'd like to call the linemen up at the infrastructure, TJ Scott of the Bowling Group, Luke Irvin of Irvin Cable Construction. There, if you all would come up to the table. And these are the guys that make it happen. And we are very fortunate to have in our state some of the premier cable installers, the linemen from Wichita linemen. And these are the Kentucky linemen. And they're an asset for Kentucky, and I'm hoping to keep them busy within the state of Kentucky before they start going elsewhere here real soon. So that's really why we have everybody here, is to get ahead of the curve. And so I think if we would have you all introduce yourself, and then Luke, if you would open up.
Absolutely. Thank you again for.
Oh, you have to push the green button in the middle. It says not.
Shows my lack of experience with this. So, anyways, thank you for having us. And again, listening to the judge just talk, speaks volumes. It's music to my ears. A project that has a smooth process from start to finish is what we seek. So, my name's Luke Irvin. I'm a senior director of operations at Irvin Cable Construction. So just a real quick introduction of our company, what we do, who we are. So we are an OSP telecom infrastructure provider, not provider, but a construction company. Essentially, simply put, we build from where broadband is generated to the home or the business, and then any transport infrastructure in between. Little history, we've been in business since 1980. We started and we are owned and operated out of a small town in western Kentucky, Sturgis, Kentucky. Since 1980, we've grown to 2,000 employees. We deploy over 600 miles a week across 30 states and 80 field offices throughout the country. And talking about rural broadband and deployment, it's near and dear to me. I grew up in a rural area that did not have services, and I've built in a lot of rural areas throughout the country, and I have seen the impact it makes. So very excited to be here and a part of these discussions, and hopefully we can provide any insight that helps with the process. Thank you. I have a lot of pictures. I sent them about 30 minutes ago to Jennifer. Sorry about that. I sent them about 10 o'clock. So I can follow up too if that works. Sure.
What I was trying to do is, a lot of people don't even know what the So she's going to go get those. What we're trying to do is show some of the people, perhaps out in the Commonwealth and up here, who don't know what the communication space and the pole is. And when we're talking about make ready, what make ready looks like, and why we have to make it ready, and how some of them
I'm TJ Scott. I'm here to represent Bolin Group, owned by or founded by Kerry Bolin and his father Blevins many years ago. They've been contracted by power companies and telecommunications companies alike to do construction and make ready and maintenance. One of which that we'll probably talk about in a moment is the Fleming Mason Cooperative, where they're performing make ready for them. And anyway, that's what Bolin Group does. And
excuse me, sorry about that. Do you want to, we talked about how you're working in other states, and the other states are working on this issue as well. And where is Kentucky with all the other states that you're involved in? Can you give us a sort of a where we are in the curve? Because if we get behind the curve, I think we're going to have a problem getting all this $1 billion put in the time frames we need to.
Absolutely. And, you know, if I tried to cover all the different types and dynamics we've been through, probably be here for days. But just, you know, what I'll say is, in comparison to some of the other states, I will say some of the other states are a little more advanced in the process and where they're at. You know, I know in Arkansas, Missouri, you know, even Tennessee, you know, with different groups and different entities, we've built a significantly larger amount of mileage than we have in our home state, which is our preferential state of, you know, where we'd prefer to work because of our, you know, that about 200 aerial lineman crews, the majority are from the home state of Kentucky. So we're definitely working in a lot of neighboring states more so than Kentucky. You know, as far as, you know, the things to expedite the process, I think what the recommendations actually that Judge Executive Covington gave, you know, kind of in line with, you talk about make ready, and, you know, the process is simply put as it goes. You go out, you do the make ready engineering, you write it out. It's never going to be perfect. If it was, you know, we wouldn't have to have solutions or anything like that. The quality of the make ready engineering and then the documentation along that process, we can't stress enough the importance of that. And the groups that come in and do those is extremely valuable. And it can cost a lot of time and money and delay projects if it isn't done effectively. And to add to that, you know, the people with experience, people that have done it, you know, that's what drives a lot of success. But when we're talking about, you know, the issues that we run into, and we're talking about temporary attachments, and we're talking about, you know, we have projects where we have to dip to underground, and we'll have to go out and bring a boring machine from span to span, every other span, if, you know, there is a high conglomeration of issues. So anything to help expedite that will get the end user broadband services significantly quicker.
Yeah, I think Representative All has a question for you.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what group or who to ask this to, but you said there's these other states, they're a little further ahead in some of their mileage, at least that they've built that and whatnot. And Judge, you said one of the things that was holding up is the survey back on the polls and whether or not they were make ready. I wonder if we could, if other states have, and if not, if we could do like a assessment of all our polls. We know we're getting ready to spend $1.1 billion or more in this space. Could we do a statewide survey of every poll right now and know which ones are make ready and which ones are not right now, today? That way we can be ahead of the game and be ready to go when we get those funds.
Yeah. That I think probably there's some poll owners that are ahead on that and some that are not. And so that's one question let's ask the poll owners when they come up on that, to see where they are, how we could help them in that process. And there's a couple different ways with this grant coming out, administrative funds, or is it direct cost of the grant? That's one of the things that we have to allocate, is where is the money to do that, to make these assessments. But I think it's clear that what have the other states done to get ahead of Kentucky per se in this? You mentioned some of our neighboring states. What
So-
have they done?
Yeah, and I guess the two things that come to mind. One is the start time. They started earlier. From the previous funding windows, RDOF, other things. Some of the other states capitalize on some of those opportunities, specifically in the rural deployment field. The electric co-ops jumped in on some of the opportunities as well. So a little more early on to kind of head into some of these issues. And then as far as specific one-offs, some of the accountability held to the attachers and the pole owners, and some, fairly harsh accountability measures. You have an X amount of time to move an attachment, and then if you go out and you see another issue, it kind of restarts that clock sometimes. But if there's a good plan and a solid, what I'll call, accountability measure, then it can make things run a lot smoother.
Yes, man.
Does most of the state have what they call the one-touch make-ready statute? I think Louisville does.
I wouldn't say most states, and
Or most of our state.
I can't speak to Kentucky.
Okay.
I know we have encountered it in some states, and we've seen both successes and failures, to be 100% honest with you. Again, it kind of goes back to the process from start to finish, and the management and the quality control documents and procedures that are set in place. But where we have seen it successful, I'll use San Antonio for an example, is the city-owned municipality. They were very ingrained with the process and worked well with the attachers, and their pole agreements had pretty tight understanding of the process.
Perhaps TJ would give us some comment on Fleming Mason and what's.
Yeah, so Bowling Group has been working with some one-touch make-ready with Fleming Mason, and that has allowed that process to go much faster. They're 400 poles ahead of the attacher, which I believe is Charter in this case. And so it allows them to just get all of the work done in one fell swoop, rather than you put the pole in, then you have somebody else come hang the power lines, and someone else has to move telephone and maybe the existing cable infrastructure. It all happens in one shot, allowing the construction to move much faster. And it's been wildly successful in Fleming Mason's territory.
Very good. And I think we have some of Charter, the owners and the other attachers coming. Do you have any final comments? Do we have any questions up here? I've noticed just driving up Highway 1416 through Verona, so I was coming out today, this weekend, all of a sudden I had a bunch of short poles and then large poles, and some of them were on the large poles, and that's what we talk about make ready. I got dual poles, how all this is handled. So, and you guys, I'm hoping that we can keep you home in Kentucky for the next 5 years, so you don't have to be the Wichita lineman out there in these other states. But we're going to have to, I think, figure out how we can expedite the process to keep you busy, because these crews are the critical factor. If we don't, dilly-dally on these permitting, they're not going to be able to get things done. But we've got to get their men out on the field as quickly as possible, or we're going to get even further behind the rest of the states, which is going to be a problem for us. Thank you very much. I think we have Charter Communication coming up next. And actually, if you would stay, TJ is just for TJ is also with Broadlink, which is a small provider, and Charter is a big provider, and he's going to share. They can come up to the table here. So he's taking off one hat, which is a lineman installer hat, and he's putting on his small comm company hat, is what we should say. Give us your experience.
So yeah, let me reintroduce myself. I'm TJ Scott. I'm the hat I'm wearing at the moment. Vice President and General Manager of Broadlink. We're slightly smaller than Charter with about 5,000 customers, serving 11 counties, and 8 of those counties wireline service. We recently were offered the opportunity to receive a portion of the Better Internet Grant at the tune of $9.2 million. Majority of that is to serve Owen County to expand into those territories. In preparing for this grant, we're a small team, and in many roles that you're looking at them. I change hats a lot. And so in applying for that, there was a lot of estimation for, construction costs, materials, and Make Ready was one of those things. And we just looked at what our traditional Make Ready costs had been. Prior projects, we haven't built anything near on the scale of many in this room have done, but the prior projects that we have done, Make Ready was really not an issue. It was just a minor conversation, especially in the rural areas. There's room on the pole because nobody else is on the pole. And so the only conversation about Make Ready was if there was not enough height to get over a highway, or maybe it was a junction pole and there was other things happening and we had to do some Make Ready. Give you an example, 2018, we built about 6 miles down to the Owen-Franklin County line to feed a water company. That cost us a total of $80,000, about $13,000 a mile. We had one pole to do Make Ready on, and it was a costly one. Power company says, hey, we'll split it with you. The process was just so easy. It was a pick up the phone, send them a KMZ file, have a conversation about what needs to happen. This needs to be raised, this needs to be lowered, and we'll make it happen. We were off to the races in about 30 days. Fast forward to last year, we applied for a project for about 10 miles of an expansion. It was a distributed expansion down in South Kentucky. Wasn't anything special, very much rural areas. We're the only attacher on the pole. Nobody else is on them. Just some two-phase power maybe. And it took 11 months to get just a Make Ready estimate on that small project. I don't want to sound like I'm trying to sing a cover of the judge's song and saying the same things, but the process took a long time, and we were very surprised at that process. And we don't even have permits yet, because now we got to send off a check and get the Make Ready costs covered, and then whatever that process is going to be after that. So. We've been met with some sticker shock, and with the elevated costs of Make Ready, we've been told to estimate 5 to 10% of the poles would have to be replaced at full price. So those are some shocks to look at. This smaller project, it actually brought us into the cost estimates that we originally planned for, being less than $3,000 a mile. But it's a wide varying scale depending on who the pole owner is. So that's kind of been our experience. Appreciate the time.
Thank you very much.
Yes. Yes, sir. We were going to have Tracy Gifford, who's the head of our construction in Kentucky, join us if you'd like. All right. Thank you.
So this is a small owner that
Thanks.
he's gone from 1 month to 11 months just so he can start his work. So now this is, I think, a rather large organization.
Yes.
That would like to tell us their experience.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We can, I guess we'll all introduce ourselves first. My name is Ellen Call, and I'm the Senior Director for Government Affairs in Kentucky and Tennessee for Charter Communications.
And I'm Dalton Workman. I'm the Director of State Government Affairs for Charter Communications.
And I'm Tracy Gifford. I'm the Senior Director of Construction in Kentucky.
Thank you all.
Mr. Chairman, we have some brief remarks. All right, thank you. So, good afternoon. So as we've heard today, we're living through a really extraordinary time in Kentucky's history when it comes to broadband deployment. When you add up the money from the federal RDOF program, $300 million in state grants, $1.1 billion in BEAD dollars, plus hundreds of millions of dollars in private investment, we will soon have about $2 billion in broadband construction activity in Kentucky. Our company alone is actively building to over 100,000 homes and small businesses spread across 50 counties in Kentucky. So it's an exciting and historic time for broadband expansion, and that's the good news. Now here's the bad news. All this broadband construction is flooding pole owners with an unprecedented volume of permit requests. As you may know, most broadband deployment is done by attaching to utility poles, and broadband providers need a permit before they are allowed to attach. The overwhelming amount of permit requests is severely straining the resources of most pole owners. We currently have submitted permit requests to 18 different pole owners in Kentucky, and those 18 pole owners have a backlog of more than 50,000 poles that are pending. Of that 50,000 pole backlog, more than 12,000 have been waiting for over a year to be approved. And here's the most alarming thing about these numbers. This is just the tip of the iceberg. Most of this backlog is related to the RDOF build-out. We've only been submitting permits for round 1 of the state grant program for the past 6 months, and round 2 of the state grant program won't be far behind. And after that, there will be permits from the $1.1 billion BEAD program, and that's just for charter. So we know that most pole owners are already flooded with permits, and they're getting ready to be hit by a tidal wave. If we don't make changes to the permitting process and help pole owners get the resources they need, these permitting delays will dramatically slow down our efforts to expand broadband to rural communities. In fact, if nothing changes, we project that these permitting delays will extend the build-out timeline to over 10 years, which I think we can all agree is completely unacceptable. This situation is already so serious that our contractors are sending crews to build broadband in other states because we can't keep them busy enough in Kentucky. Dalton?
Thank you, Ellen. Delays in pole permitting have also led to project islands we're seeing around the state. These islands occur where we have a completed fiber construction but are unable to activate because of permitting delays between the completed section and our hub. Broadband goes beyond providing high-speed internet just directly to homes across our communities, but Scott County is a perfect example. They are trying to implement a new Zetron system that requires access to high-speed internet at fire stations. The system would target 911 and other emergency service notifications to the closest fire station and shorten response times. For example, Sadieville Fire Station would only receive the alerts at the areas they cover. Unfortunately, since Sadieville is not connected yet, the whole system across the county is on hold. The original plan was for the county to activate the system earlier in the year, but because of delays in pole permitting, they are not looking to be able to activate this system for the county until early next year. But we want to end on an optimistic note. It doesn't have to be like this. We are already seeing great co-ops such as Shelby Energy and Fleming Mason, as has been discussed today, using creative approaches to deal with this issue and expedite permit approvals. And we are grateful to them for their flexibility. Both Fleming Mason and Shelby are providing examples that pole owners could follow across the state. We're at the very front end of this problem. If we are willing to take bold and decisive action, we can fix this. If we are willing to provide pole owners with more resources, work with them in new creative ways, we can fix this. I hope we can all work together to meet this problem head on and make Kentucky the first state to connect all of its citizens to high-speed internet, and we are committed to doing everything we can to make that a reality. We thank you for your time and happy to take any questions.
I think it's important, when you go back that this tidal wave has already, what's caused the delay is actually only from the RDOF money and the $300 million the General Assembly appropriated years ago.
Yes, sir.
Correct.
It's actually the RDOF money and just part of that $300 million, just round 1. Yes, sir.
Yeah, and all that's been spent. And we have not released the $1.1 billion yet that came down from the federal government. So this problem that you have, yes, you said very correctly, is getting ready to become a major problem. So I am concerned that we are having these issues. And again, I will tell you this, in testimony from the Broadband Deployment Department, they said pole attachments can run up to $20,000 a pole. That's concerning too. So again, there's several issues here we got to deal with, and I was hoping we could stay out of it, but it looks like we will not be able to. So thank you guys for your testimony today.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm gonna go back to my make ready question. When the pole owners are out doing work, routine maintenance or whatever, are we taking an inventory of those poles? And do we have some kind of like database of the poles that the pole owners have of which ones are ready versus not ready to,
You want to respond to that?
There's no database that I know of other than after we submit. I mean, I'm sure they've got a database of their polls, but not necessarily the ones that are ready to attach.
I think that's something we ought to think about considering as an oversight to speed this along, is to require our pole owners to develop a database of their poles and whether or not they are right now today make ready. Now, I know that weather can happen and circumstances can change, but a best guess, best faith effort around which poles are make ready versus which ones are not, because that's going to be a big holdup in pushing this money out. And then number two, talked about bold leadership and ideas and things like this to catch up, make us ready to kind of get past some of this backlog, not to mention the future backlog we're inevitably going to have. What is that? I mean, bold leadership and bold ideas, that's a great slogan or tagline, but we got to actually do something. What do we need to do?
So there are several things that we could do to make this better than it is today. The first problem, I really think so many pole owners need more resources. I just think so many of them just flat out don't have the manpower to deal with this volume of permit requests. And so maybe there's an opportunity to provide some more resources for them, right? Some more, even like temporary workers who are qualified to help them dig out of this backlog. So that's one option. I know there's been some discussion today about this, this process of using temporary attachments. That's something that we should probably talk a lot more about. My colleague Tracy can tell you that, temporary attachments are used all over the country. They have been used in Kentucky during the Kentucky Wired build-out. They've been used in upstate New York by several utilities. There's a utility in Ohio doing it now, and there are several utilities in Texas that are using this process right now. They are building their broadband in Texas 6 times faster than we are in Kentucky, and it's because they're using this temporary attachment method. So that's another idea that we should probably discuss. And then there's also, you heard the gentleman from Bowling talking about, I don't know how to characterize it, maybe kind of a one-touch that Fleming Mason is using. And so basically, and Tracy, correct me, but I mean, basically that is you have one contractor that's qualified to hang the broadband and also do the power make ready at the same time. So I think it's going to go quickly. So that's another option, right? And then, Tracy, could you just talk a little about, Shelby Energy has done some creative things too, if you want to tell a little bit more about that.
Yeah, Shelby Energy actually, they asked about the volume, the pass we were going to take, and then they literally got out in front. They pre-surveyed, much like you're talking about, the routes we were going to be on, replaced the poles, stockpiled poles, even back during COVID when it was hard to get poles, and did like 800 pole blitzes where they would go out and replace 800 poles at a time. That utilizes the resources well. It gives them efficiency and lowers the overall cost for the replacements. And honestly, it gets them ready, and the route is ready when we get there. So they've done a great job for us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Insurance. Did you also, in Scott County, one of the things I've heard is that you ran into a problem identifying who the pole owners actually are? Is that a problem in some areas, or?
Do you want to address that?
We did. Whenever you get into joint use pole where it's, say, AT&T and KU, there is a tag on every pole, but in every instance that tag hasn't lasted as long as the pole. So we have run into instances where we think we've submitted all the permits, we think everything's ready, we actually get, in some cases, an approval from the pole owner, and then at the very last minute we find out, yeah, that's not our pole. So we do see that in some cases.
So that's slowing the process down too.
Yeah, you basically start all over.
Very good. So we're going to have the pole owners up here, I think, giving us our perspective on it. Do you all have any final comments, or before we get the pole owners up here?
No, we're just grateful to be invited here today. And I honestly, I think the pole owners can probably come up with solutions in addition to the ones that we have mentioned here today. And I'll be anxious to hear from them.
Very good.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony.
Thank you.
Thank you. So if, I think we have LGKU up next. And we had some preliminary discussions. Everybody wants to solve this problem. I mean, this is not a fault of anybody other than this unique situations where in the next 3 to 5 years, we're going to probably touch a large number of the polls in the state of Kentucky. And so it's something we're not going to see probably again in our lifetime. So we need to get it right. And so I would appreciate you introducing yourself, letting us know what you're doing and your testimony.
Turn your mic on.
Yeah.
Chairman Williams, thank you. I'm Caroline Clark, Director of External Affairs for Kentucky Utilities and Louisville Gas and Electric. And we just want to thank you for inviting us to be here today to be part of this important discussion. To my right, we've got Peter Waltrip, our Vice President of Distribution, and to his right, Jason Jones, who's our manager in charge of third-party attachments. We have a few slides to walk through, and I'm going to turn it over to Peter for that. And then, of course, we're happy to answer your questions.
Thank you. And I'll maybe start with our, there we go. I'll maybe start with our 250 line men and women. Appreciate the Glenn Campbell introduction today, so thank you. While the slides come up, I will say we are very supportive of the broadband build-out across the Commonwealth. As LG&E and KU, we are very capable of scaling up to support the demands of this effort and understand its impact across the Commonwealth. We're going to talk a little bit to some of the opportunities, certainly reinforce a couple of the comments that Judge Covington made in his remarks. Wanted to start first in consultation earlier with Co-Chair Williams. We had spoken about the benefit of maybe giving a little more overview about the attachments process and how this works. Luke Irvin had commented a little bit on this, and maybe we can build a little more into that.
And I've got this slide up here. Do I need to hit share, or how do I project it to this?
I think what we're trying to do is give members of the committee a picture of the communication space. Okay.
And we have that for you here, yes.
Is there? There's some pictures of it there. Okay, we can look in the pack in the public. This is what makes our modern society work. It's what we drive past every day, and nobody ever notices. I mean, it's just phenomenal. So, but let's go on. I guess we don't have the ability to see that right now. We have it in our packets of the communication space. Maybe we'll get some later on by the end of the meeting. But
all right, we'll pantomime, and hopefully we can convey it that way.
Okay.
So for the members of the committee at the board who were able to see the packet, you're looking at a picture of a pole, as Senator Williams spoke to. We all drive past these every day. Those of us sitting in the utility space spend a lot more time looking at them than the general public does. But you're looking at a few different spaces on the pole. I thought it'd be valuable just to highlight this. We design and build, our engineers build these systems according to the National Electric Safety Code. That's the governing set of rules and regulations that outline the safety of utility infrastructure. It is different from the National Electric Code that governs our homes and businesses. That National Electric Safety Code outlines, among other things, clearances between different conductors that ensure the safety of the general public, as well as the safety of those workers who work on these facilities. You're looking at the top of the poles are generally what we call the power space. These are the high voltage facilities. Depending on what's being carried on them, those could be 12,000 volt lines, they could be 69,000 volt lines or higher. So high voltage facilities. Working in that power space takes a special set of skills, it takes special tools, and it takes very special training. So it is a specific and highly skilled workforce that works within that space. What we refer to as the communication space is where telecoms are attaching. That's generally further down on the pole. It is, again, a different skill set. It's lower voltage. And then below that is what we refer to as the public use space. That's where we're hanging our lost dog signs, our yard sale postings, things like that. We don't love to see things mounted in that space, but understand, that's what the lower area of the pole is called. Because there are different qualifications for the workforce who work in the power space and the communication space, the National Electric Safety Code outlines clearances between those areas to ensure that the workers who work in the communication space, who have those different training and tools, aren't up in the power space, aren't at risk of injury or electrocution. So that's the basis for when we talk about make ready, or we as pole owners refer to as making ready. What we're really talking about is making space on these poles within that communication space, so there's adequate clearance between the communications facilities, between the workers, and the energized facilities at the top of the pole, as well as ensuring that there's adequate clearance above ground line and things below. If you turn with me, the next slide is just a general review of the attachments process. And we've spoken to this through the meeting today, but again, thought it'd be beneficial to highlight, broadly speaking, when an attacher is looking to attach to our poles, the pole owner, there are some straightforward steps that follows. We first need to know what's being attached to and what's being placed on the pole. And both of those are important, where it's going, but also what it is. We use that information to understand the weight, the tension, the impact that that's going to have on the pole. So there's an application process for Louisville Gas and Electric and Kentucky Utilities. We have a portal. That's an electronic process where the attacher can notify us the what and the where. There's a nominal application fee that enables us to dedicate the time and resources to performing the survey and engineering. Once that nominal application fee is paid, we go into a field survey and an engineering process. We've streamlined that field survey and engineering process. We use some pretty advanced technology. We send a technician out with a vernier stick and a special camera. What they do is go from pole to pole, and this is a very efficient process, with an insulated vernier stick, a camera, and we use some smart software to very quickly take a picture of each pole, determine what the clearances are, what the mounting points are for every attachment on that pole, and we identify where we have adequate space and where we don't. So that's the field survey part, where we're looking at clearances. It then goes on to an engineering review, and what the engineers are looking at is where we need to make clearances. What are we doing? Are we moving communication cables down? Are we moving power facilities up? And in very rare cases, the pole's not tall enough and we need to add additional height to the pole, or we need to replace the pole in its entirety. The other thing they're looking at is the loading of the pole. They're looking at structural capacity. Obviously, part of what we're ensuring is the reliability of our infrastructure, and we're ensuring that pole is not going to come down. So we're looking at loading, we're looking at clearances. Once those reviews are done and we've identified what scope is necessary to make the poles ready for attachment, we're generating an estimate of cost. Oh, fantastic. All right, thank you. We're generating an estimate of the cost required to perform that construction make-ready work. We're invoicing the attacher. Once payment is made, we're performing the construction activity and notifying the attacher that they can proceed with their attachments. Once they've made attachments, we go out and do a post-survey, make sure everything's consistent with what we expected, and we true up the billing at the end of this. I will note, we talked a little bit about cost of pole replacement. Charter had spoken to roughly 5 to 10% of poles need to be replaced. In our experience, that's closer to 5%. On a note about cost, we do have a regular process, as most pole owners do. We have a regular process of inspecting all of our poles. And so we go out on a routine basis. We send trained people with trained equipment to be able to assess the life and health of those poles. If we identify during that routine process that the pole needs to be replaced due to decay, due to end of life, that pole replacement is at our cost, not at the attacher's cost. So we do not bill attachers the cost of replacing a pole if we've identified it as needing replacement due to inspection maintenance activities. So quick overview, general process, that flows pretty smoothly. If we go to the next. So I'll talk more specifically to Louisville Gas and Electric and Kentucky Utilities and our process, our tariff with the commission. Our tariff considers projects of different sizes and scales and outlines different timeframes for those. I won't get into a lot of detail, but largely for smaller attachments where I think we talked about Pratt Lane earlier. In the case of extending a short line into a new development, that has obviously a very different time frame for engineering and construction than hundreds of miles of fiber build out. And so our process considers those differences of project size and scale and has differing timeframes built in, prescriptive timeframes for engineering and construction. In the case of large build outs, which is what we're talking about here, we have what's called under agreement a high volume plan. And this is what we're working with Charter Spectrum on now. In the case of a high volume plan, we're not using prescriptive timeframes. We're negotiating individually with the provider to identify the schedule, the timing that meets their needs. And so our process, again, it considers various volumes. If you want a page ahead. So as a utility, we have tremendous experience at resourcing and scaling quickly to meet large project demands. And I'll give just a few quick examples here, but there are many that I could point to. Metronet within Lexington, we were able to scale up to support 17,000 poles. During our storm restoration in March, which is still fresh in our minds as a utility, we had more than 400,000 customers out. We have the relationships and the networks with neighboring states, with various construction contractors, to be able to very, very quickly scale up our organization and augment our in-house capabilities. During that storm, we brought in more than 1,600 line people from neighboring states to restore those 400,000 customers in under 7 days. So we have that breadth, we have that ability to scale. The Blue Oval SK battery plant outside of Elizabethtown, we've been able to build 2 transmission lines, 2 massive substations in under 12 months. And again, we have the access to those scale of resources. When we talk about Scott County, we've brought 50 line people in. A number of those from neighboring states, from Ohio. Collectively, they've been able to replace more than 100 poles in a little over 6 weeks. So we can scale very rapidly. What I will say is when we look back on some of the learnings from Scott County, from the support and working relationship with Charter Spectrum, honestly, we miscategorized that work to begin with. On the prior slide, I spoke to differences between project sizes and some of those prescriptive timeframes. We'd initially, based on some of the work scope that we had seen, we'd categorized that work as being small volume. So you heard Judge Covington earlier speak to some limitations on the number of polls that could be submitted per month, that 300 polls per month. That really comes from having misbucketized that work or misidentified that work as being small volume. We've since addressed that and correctly bucketized this as a high volume plan. I think worked very collaboratively with Charter Spectrum to build out a high volume plan that meets their needs. Now, and this is where I'll get into the keys to success, and I'll absolutely reinforce some of the comments that Judge Covington made. Like any large project, the largest key that I would highlight to success is we need to know the scope and the schedule at the onset. When we know that, we can assemble the resources to be successful. We had some missteps, frankly, with that in Scott County, and many kudos to Judge Covington for helping to bring the parties together to bring better clarity to what the scope and schedule of that work is. But since knowing that, again, we've been able to assemble those resources. So having that clear definition of scope and schedule up front is absolutely imperative. and again would reinforce Judge Covington's comments about a holistic review at the onset of scope. Secondarily, I have here communication. And again, Judge Covington talked to a collaborative approach. The judge stepped in Scott County to bring a lot of coordination and cooperation between the parties. We have the resources to do that. Had we correctly bucketized or categorized the work in Scott County at the onset to be as large as it was, we would have engaged project management resources to bring the right kind of coordination, regular dialogue between the parties, and stakeholder engagement. Again, that's a routine behavior for us with large efforts. We've since done that, and we'll do that with the rest of this work going forward. But it is imperative that we have, with any large project, with any large work, scope evolves, schedules evolve, things change. It's key to have that collaboration along the process. And thirdly, it's imperative that we as the pole owners, but also the providers, look to our processes and eliminate bureaucracy and administrative hurdles where they exist. And not to be a broken record, but again, reinforcing some of the comments that Judge Covington made this morning or earlier in the proceeding. And I'll give you a quick example. In some of the back and forth that we've had with Charter Spectrum through Scott County, our process generally on submissions, those applications, is that if they're erroneous, we reject them and send them back. And we were getting into a lot of volleys back and forth over what I would consider to be minor QA/QC type issues. We were able to step outside the process, talk to one another, engage party to party, pull our engineering teams together, work directly, and resolve those issues. But there are certainly opportunities for us as we continue forward to better engage between the parties to resolve these issues proactively. So I'll conclude with the presentation with that and open it up for comments and questions.
Okay, thank you very much. So we're going to probably have a lot of smaller projects. I'm looking at these project time lines. If we get up to 300 to 1,000, we're 5 months out before they're even processed, right? I mean, this is the permitting process you're here. Or is that the entire make ready, 5 months to make ready?
If you want to pull that back up, what you're referencing, the
150 days.
Yeah, the 105 days, 150 days, those are the construction timelines. So I will say, Senator Williams, that's what is allowed under the process. It still allows us to be much quicker than that, and we generally are much quicker than that.
Okay, Representative Hall.
Yeah, just same question, just different group. So your poles, do you have like a database of all your poles and know everything about your pole? When I say know everything about your pole, what height, where it is in the process, is it make ready, how old it is? Do you have some kind of database like that of your infrastructure?
Yeah, that's a great question. We do, to a point. So we have a geospatial information system. We keep record of every pole, what height it is, where it is, all of the particulars, when it was installed. What we don't know in that database, we don't have clearances documented. So I couldn't tell you exactly how much space there is between communications and the power space above.
Is that something that you could add to your database in a cost prohibitive process?
The second part of that question is an important part, right?
Yeah.
So we could, maybe just a little bit of background. LG and KU, we've got about 500,000 poles across 5,500 square miles spreading the Commonwealth. It would be a costly effort for us to go out and survey all of those. It's certainly possible. What we would recommend is getting ahead of this work with as much pre-planning as we possibly can. So for context, I said we have about 500,000 poles. As we've talked to Charter Spectrum, we're developing our high volume plan with them. We're seeing about 22,000 poles across the Commonwealth. And as we're documenting that plan, we're able to identify what the priorities are, what the urgency is, and we can appropriately align that survey work to ensure that ultimately the schedules are attainable. We would advocate that getting that kind of alignment and visibility at a high, to use Covington's word again, holistic level, allows us to be much more cost effective than doing a blanket inspection of every pole in the Commonwealth.
But you inspect a lot of your poles on a routine maintenance, so I would encourage you as a part of this ongoing new effort to make this a part of your regular maintenance. I understand sending people out to go look at 5,500 poles is a lot to do all at one time, but you're looking at poles every day, and it ought to become a part of the regular survey to document that missing information and to add it into your database so we know and you can answer those questions and those permits quicker. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Co-Chair Pratt.
I had to comment on this. I do like the pole attachment tiers, small, 105 days, the rule of the game. Medium is 150 days. It's a high volume, and we're getting ready to have a lot of high volume. The fact that it's mutually agreed upon, and that's my concern. What happens if the broadband provider needs to get this project out with the money they have in 300 days or whatever day we come up with, and you say, I can't do it for a year? That's the problem I have with this right now. I'd like to see something that says we can do these projects in X amount of days, because as we said earlier, this backlog that we already have, and whether you guys are part of the problem or not, is from $300 million that we haven't spent all of, the RDOF money, which has been out, but we got $1.1 billion coming down the pipeline to us from the federal government that we still have not released. It's going to get much worse. I'd like to see something at high volume that said this is the criteria we're going to work within, so that, don't get me wrong, my company bids a lot of bids. I'd like to know the rules of the game before we get into it. And so that way we have a set timeline that everyone can agree to. And again, the problem when we say mutually agreed upon is the fact you own the poles. They don't. They want to attach to them, and there comes in a problem. So I really would like to see some movement on that if all possible.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Representative Pratt. Yes, certainly the high volume plans, when we say mutually agreed upon, they are intended to meet the needs of the attacher, right? So we've done this in the past. Peter mentioned MetroNet earlier. Yes, it was a much smaller scale, but we can certainly scale up as appropriate to the needs. The important thing is that we, going back to the comments of both Peter and Judge Covington, we need to know and understand the scope of that work so that we can scale appropriately. If we know the location and the volume, then we can work out agreements to support that. And
well, seeing how Scott County is near and dear to my heart for more ways than one, we heard about the attachment, CommSpace, temporary attachments now in Scott County. Can we facilitate that to get that project up and moving at this point in time? Are you guys willing to do that?
Well, let me comment first on temporary attachment, and then I'll let Jason speak a little bit to some of where we've been able to pivot and reprioritize working with Charter and Spectrum, because I think that there is a good story to tell for Scott County. There's been discussion today about this concept of temporary attachments. The anxiety that I have as a pole owner is the National Electric Safety Code it gives no distinction for timing in clearances and safe working zones. At the end of the day, we have high voltage facilities on poles. Our concern and our focus is for the safety of the public, the safety of our workforce, and for the reliability of the infrastructure. And so until we've done a review, and we've conducted field survey, we've gone through some engineering analysis, we can't grant attachments to facilities. So I think it's more important that we identify, and this is our conversation through the high volume plan, how we work collaboratively with the attachers to meet their needs. And I will say again, Scott County, as we've grown to understand the needs of the project, we have very, very rapidly scaled up those resources to be able to meet the timetables of that work. And maybe Jason, you want to add some insight into how that's worked?
Yeah. So as Peter mentioned, once we knew that scope and understood the full scope, and we began to harness those resources. I think it was mentioned earlier that we replaced about 100 poles. Plus, we performed a make ready, meaning moving cables on an existing pole on about another 100 poles. So we touched 200 poles, 100 pole replacements in less than, I think, around 8 weeks or so. So, I mean, we can scale up and we can support it. It really is, again, to sound like a broken record here, but it really is important that we just all work together and we have that scope and understanding up front. And I think that's what the high volume plan does for us, and that's what it's intended to do. The one that we've been negotiating now with one of the attachers, we've got agreement. They said this is the volume we need. This is how fast you need to perform the work. We've agreed to that, and we're making plans to finalize that agreement and then be able to move forward with that after the first of the year. So I think both parties working together are in agreement right now of what we need.
I think it's noteworthy, Representative Pratt, I'm sorry, if I can build on that quickly. I think I sense in your question an apprehension that we're dragging out those timetables. We could have brought more resources. We spoke to the 50 linemen that we were able to bring in on that project to meet that timetable. We had the ability to bring in more, and we were told that was we had enough to meet the timetables that were being expected. So we will ensure that we're not the impediment when we know what that scope is in working through these high volume plans.
Excuse me. I think Judge Covington had raised his hand.
Sorry. And just,
Could you come up? Just
sure.
Right.
Maybe you could you go back to the slide that showed the picture of the comm space?
I can't.
That's the widest gap in comm space I think I've ever seen. Okay.
And just,
I
am not
a dozen attachers there. Go
I'm
ahead,
not
Judge.
an engineer, but I have to, I'm advocating for Scott County, and safety has to be a priority. I understand the last thing we want, but looking at the distances there, and then looking at, this is a major issue in deployment. And we want deployment for our communities and access for our citizens. And, if there's any way to navigate an agreement that can safely allow for a temporary attachment, and I don't know about loads, I'm not an engineer, but just looking at that picture makes you think, that comm space is much lower than the power supply space. And then, just to give a little bit more insight, we were blessed to receive an NTIA grant of $3 million. Because of this process delay, we have been required to apply for a no-cost extension with the federal government on our grant, $3.1 million. And, let me say again, we want safety first. We do not want anyone's health or life endangered. But if there's a way to navigate this, and my question, KU has over 500,000 poles. Have you all ever navigated an agreement with another entity, another provider, to allow attachment in the comm space? Is it just never been done, or has it been done in the past?
Are you asking?
Yes, I'm asking you all.
Well, I'm sorry, you're asking about this temporary.
About the temporary attachment in the comm space.
Yeah.
So you could go ahead, you can go ahead down Philip Pratt Lane and run your fiber, temporary attach, then come back, do your make ready, replace that one pole. But the issue that I see is Charter Spectrum has divided Scott County into 35 OLTs, optical line termination points. And they activate our county by OLT. And when you have poles that have to be replaced or poles that need make-ready work done, it really is a barrier to deployment and activation. And let me stress again, since July, and it's evident from the testimony today that at July, they determined that this was a high volume project, and that since July, KU has been a great partner, and the project has moved at the pace they describe. And Charter's, been incredible to work with, and we're very blessed to have them as a provider, and for them to have answered, our bid. And I believe that they've done a lot of work, but we need to get past the finish line. We only have activated, I think, 2,400 homes to this point. It's my belief before we're done, we'll have over 6,000 homes. And, we want to do it safely, but this right here is a major impediment to deployment and activation. And I'll stop talking.
Good. Let me ask, so it seems to me we have two impediment processes. One is the initial permitting time. I mean, when I submit an application. The two is the make ready time. Okay, I mean, these can operate separately, because you're not going to use your make ready clock starts once you get the permit done, you get the money. But so in the permitting process, one thing I've heard, I look at these big, small, we're going to have a lot of small guys coming across, probably a lot of small, medium, and high volume coming across our desk. One of the things that I'm concerned about, you say you ever pull everybody in from the surrounding states 3 to 5 years ago from now, when we're actually doing the $1.1 billion, maybe hopefully maybe 2 years when that starts, you're not going to have those people available. I mean, because the other states are all going to be asking to take your installers from Kentucky over there. And we're about to get a order of magnitude more. I don't think you're prepared to hire an order of magnitude more installers or linemen out there. And you shouldn't, because 5 years from now, we're not going to see this for a long time. That's one of the PSCs. So what can we do to speed up the permit process? And then what can we do to speed up the make-ready process? And so one of the things I'd heard is that some of these small guys, when you're looking at small guys, they have to go in every day and try to submit 300, see if you picked them up. You have 2 queues, and what's the name of your system again?
Catapult.
You have 2 queues. One's a submittal queue, one's the acceptance. If they're small, they got to go in and start moving them over manually almost. Is that accurate? And we're going to have to look at this as a big project, even though we got a lot of small projects. Are you prepared to deal with that? And the other thing is, on the other side of the fence, I think that Kentucky Wired, I hear, they did have temporary attachments when they put that up. Was that true, that you permitted them to do that? So
I heard testimony to that effect earlier, and I was not part of the group at that time, and I honestly just do not know. I'll have to check and get back to you.
Okay.
I would argue, however, that there really is no such thing, right? I mean, you either attach or you don't from an engineering and safety standpoint. I mean, either you encroached in the safety zone or you didn't, whether it was for a short period or for a longer period. And if Mother Nature comes through with a storm, that load is on the pole. So, the fact that we're kind of referencing these temporary attachments,
you mean we got to get linemen from Wichita? Is that what?
Yeah,
Okay.
I just want to make sure we understand. I mean, the attachment's there or it's not.
Okay.
And and I think Peter just flipped the slides.
If I can for a moment, I think Senator Williams, go ahead.
Yeah, I know. These are good polls. We have the co-ops to bring up, and then the PSC I think is interesting. We're running overtime.
All right.
I don't want to be, all on you. Thank you very much for your time and consideration.
Appreciate your time. Thanks for having us.
Good. But we can leave that up while the co-ops come up and talk to us. Okay. And I know I'm Owen Electric, and I saw you've been doing a lot of make ready, but I already got my internet along. So I think I got my internet first, my fiber from Boone. It is Boone County, but your footprint. But
that's great news.
Go ahead and introduce yourselves. And
thank you, Mr. Chairman. We appreciate very much the opportunity to be here today. My name is Chase Krigler. I'm Director of Government Affairs for Kentucky Electric Cooperatives. Kentucky Electric Cooperatives is the trade association for the 24 distribution cooperatives in the Commonwealth of Kentucky, and then the 2 generation and transmission cooperatives, East Kentucky Power Cooperative and Big Rivers. Collectively, we serve roughly a little under 1.8 million member owners in the Commonwealth of Kentucky in 117 of 120 counties. We are fortunate to have with us today Sean Knowles. Sean is the president and CEO of McLean Engineering Company. Sean has been working with electric co-ops across the Commonwealth for several years now on navigating what can obviously be, as we've heard today, the complex nature of pole attachments, helping our members out across the state. And we very much value his expertise on that. And Sean has a brief presentation to talk about where the cooperatives are at.
Okay. Thank you.
No, I'll try to be very brief. Look forward to answering your questions. So I want to just begin with a very brief, a brief history of recent work on pole attachments by cooperatives in the Commonwealth that we've worked with. This is within the last year. We've worked with 9 cooperatives to permit 35,000 poles, which represents an implied investment of $150 million by our estimation. And we've had good conversations with several of the attachers, including Charter and Spectrum, about what they expect to see in 2024 to be sure that we're prepared for that. Obviously, as we've talked about today, we expect those volumes to go up. I also want to just speak very briefly about the commitments the cooperatives have made, really since the recent regulation by the Public Service Commission on pole attachments to facilitate the process. The co-ops, and this is an underestimate, but it's a conservative estimate of the level of engagement that the cooperatives have made across the state with each other, with attachers, and then individually to make sure that they're prepared to meet the need here. The overarching point of this is that, as you all have discussed, the co-ops want this service. They live in small communities in rural areas. They want broadband just as much as the next person, and the employees of the cooperatives want to see that happen. And so, the challenge is how do they navigate that and encourage that and facilitate that in a way that is safe and facilitates the attachment remaining on the pole safely for the next 50 years, not the next 6 months while the process is underway. And so, that's really I would say the source of their concern, and the heart of the challenge is, as we've talked about a lot, we have to be sure that we facilitate a process that meets the need, facilitates the funding, meets the timelines, but also that leaves safe and reliable infrastructure behind for the cooperative members, for the attaching entities, for the public, and for all parties. So, these are some of the potential issues that we have to be aware of. I would say, one of the items I'll talk a little more about is at the bottom of the list is post-construction inspection. The Public Service Commission in the regulations and the tariffs that they have overseen over the last few years have provided some good tools for us as pole owners to be able to ensure that construction has been done safely. And one of the most important of those is post-construction inspection. And so, that's something that we're going to have to administer very diligently as we engage in this process. I would say that's one of the things that, as we've seen thousands of poles get permitted over the last year or so, that we need to be sure that we have a process in place to ensure safety on the back end of these attachments. I think everybody wants to see it done well and safely and quickly, but we have to come behind when the time pressure is less and make sure it's done to NESC code and again, safe construction practices. So last slide from me here, just some best practices and takeaways that we've noticed in our year or so of actively engaging in this process. I'll reiterate what was said earlier. Communication is super important. That communication is something that can be one-sided or it can be non-existent. And in a lot of cases, the rural providers particularly didn't have attachments in any volume approaching this in the years prior. And so for them to scale the way they have really requires communication and collaboration and investment in a better process. It's a very different process now than it was 2 years ago. The process must be actively administered, and that's something that's, frankly, for a small electric cooperative that doesn't have the staff, it's a new challenge. And then again, awareness of the regulations and the tariffs and rights and responsibilities is important. And that drives me to my last point on the post-construction inspection. And it just, the last reminder I want to leave you with really quickly is that this is a significant resources that the co-ops have made, significant investment in terms of time, in terms of personnel, in terms of new software and systems that they didn't have, they weren't paying for 2 years ago, just to facilitate this process. And so, I guess what I want to leave you with is that the cooperatives are really engaged in this because they want to see it happen, and they want to see it happen safely.
Thank you very much. Do you share the same concern about temporary attachments as KU, or would you permit them, or and did you see those when Kentucky Wired was going up?
So we were not involved in the Kentucky Wired project, and I'll make my disclaimer now. I'm not an engineer. I was a finance major, and so I won't try to be an engineer here. But I think you can't ignore the point that was made that either the attachment's on the pole or it's not on the pole. If a truck drives under that pole and catches a low wire and pulls the pole down, nobody's going to care if it was temporary or permanent. The damage will have been done. And so I think that's a very, that reality is very difficult to avoid, unfortunately.
Hey, thank you. Thank you very much. And we are over time on the committee. I think we've lost most of the committee. So I think I fail for my first actual committee chairmanship. Is that the first one we were here, we had a clock. I think I'm going to have to go back to the clock for me, not for you, on that. But we have two other presenters. The Public Service Commission. Would you like to say anything now? Yes, if you would please come up, and we'll end with the Public Service Commission, and then I expect we'll have some more meetings on this. And once we're in session, we will continue these, and we have got to get this right so we can move forward. But if you could wrap it up and let us know what we heard here.
Yeah, thanks, Chairman. My name is Kent Chandler. I'm chair of the Kentucky Public Service Commission. At the beginning of this year, I had my representative, Representative Pratt there, my state senator, and my judge executive. We're only missing David Livingston, and I could have really done some damage here. The reason I mention that is that I live in Scott County. I'm a Georgetown resident, and I got to say, before I was contacted, and I'll get into some background here in a second, before I was contacted by folks here in the state Senate, we have no internet here, but that's okay. This is the first time I had not heard about any issues in Scott County. So to your point, I think, Representative Pratt, I think I agree. You all shouldn't have to have done this. And I'll give a little bit of background, but I really wish we could have been contacted earlier, that there were actually issues out there. And we've created processes that with the intention that when there were issues that people would come to the Public Service Commission and complain to them. So just quick background, the PSC regulates utilities in the state. We regulate 19 of the 24 distribution cooperatives that Kentucky Electric Cooperatives has. We do not regulate the pole attachments of cooperatives that get power from the TVA or from municipal utilities. We do, however, regulate the pole attachments for certain telephone entities, electric utilities that are electric utilities that are under our regulation. So the major investor-owned utilities and the 19 co-ops that we regulate. We regulate pole attachments in Kentucky because we told the federal government we wanted to regulate pole attachments in this country. 40 years ago, effectively, all the states were given an opportunity to what's called reverse preempt the FCC. And Kentucky, the PSC, chose to say that we wanted to reverse preempt the federal government and we wanted to be in charge of pole attachments in Kentucky. In about 2017, 2018, internally, the commission decided that it was time to really update our regulation of pole attachments, particularly in light of the expected increase in broadband expansion. We started working on that internally in 18 and 19 and put those draft regulations out in either late 19 or early 20 for public consumption. Those pole attachments, those regulations are wide-ranging, and there were very, very many. There were stakeholder meetings on them. There were public filings. We go through, anytime we change a regulation at the PSC, we go through a very robust informal process with all the invested stakeholders before we go through the formal process here through the LRC. So I just wanted to say that is the ground rules that have been set about a year and a half ago. And we did something very unique. We did a lot of unique things to those regulations, but one of them was to create a very specific complaint process specific to broadband and pole attachments. Anything else that deals with the Public Service Commission, with the exception of one item, which I think is statutory, every other complaint that anybody could have about rates and service of public utilities goes through a very broad complaint process. When we redid our regulations, we came up with a very specific complaint process just for pole attachments and broadband attachments. No one has used that process. So if there are problems, if there are people not following the rules or not following the regulations or not following the tariffs, nobody has brought those to us in that process. So I'll say right now, after hearing everything today, we're happy, and had we known before, would have been happy previously to start stakeholder meetings on these issues. Insofar as there are issues that we did not identify or did not expect when we came up with our regulations to begin with, we need to address those. We need to understand them. I'm happy to call stakeholders together as early as next week if that's what it takes. But we really, until this process, none of this had been brought to our attention that there have been any issues, any backlogs, any problems, any concerns about the implementation of the regulation. So I just want to start with that. I know start and probably end, Chairman, given the time constraints. But as you can hear, I'm probably a little bit animated because I'm interested in fixing the issues, but also a little frustrated because I think we could have addressed this back in July or even earlier than that had we known that there were actual problems occurring. So can I, and sorry, if you have something, Representative Pratt, but there were just 2 or 3 things that were mentioned, I've highlighted here that I want to specifically address. So again, regulation of poles. There are thousands of poles in Kentucky that are not regulated or are not owned by an entity that's regulated by the Public Service Commission. So there may be some of the things that people bring to you that may be completely outside of this ordinary process, but that wasn't discussed today at all. And I was actually hoping to go to our website and bring up the rainbow that is Kentucky in terms of the different utilities we have. We have a lot of different entities that own poles across the state. And so some of them are going to have to follow our rules. Some of them are going to have their own set of rules that are under nobody's specific regulation. So one of the items that I still don't know and I'd love to address during this informal stakeholder process, if we can get it off the ground, is the issue with the surveys or is the issue with the make ready? I still don't think after today, when people use the term permitting, necessarily, I still don't have an appreciation for what it is that they're concerned with the backlog. Is it merely that 1,000 poll plus survey results? Is it how long the survey is taking, or is it how long the make ready work is taking before they can go out and do it? We put a number in the regulations, a number of what we call self-help remedies that are available in the regulation. Sounds like, at least secondhand through or some of the comments that were made today, that there are this is my personal opinion, but there may be factual scenarios that I didn't anticipate that might be occurring that might render some of those self-help remedies moot. That the self-help may not be available because of intervening factual circumstances. So that would be something I'd be very interested in taking back and looking at and understanding more than I certainly got today under the 2 hours of the presentation. I'll also say it was referenced today, the Representative All was asking about periodic inspections. We have a regulation that requires defined periodic inspections for certain utility infrastructure, and then anything that's not specific, it has a default timeline for periodic inspections of poles. 5 or 6 years. I can send the regulation over, but the utilities have to inspect every so often. I can tell you we caused a lot of heartburn as it relates to the utilities when we wrote this regulation, because we basically said that you now have an affirmative duty to inspect your poles. You've always said that. But to keep records indicating which poles were needing to be replaced and which didn't, so that effectively if a attacher comes through and attaches and the utility doesn't have information as to the condition of that pole from the last inspection, we assume there's a rebuttable presumption in the regulation that effectively says if you don't have records that it was a good pole, there's a rebuttable presumption that it was a bad pole and that the cost of replacing that pole should not be put on the pole owner. Really trying to shift the burden onto the utilities to keep really good records about what condition that their poles are in. So if there are additional data sets or data entries that need to be recorded during those periodic inspections, I think that's something I'd be interested in looking at, and actually us requiring that of all the utilities as they do those recurring inspections.
Thanks, sir. I appreciate again. I would much rather have you guys get involved in this than myself. But again, if we have to, we will. As you heard today, this is an issue. And if you guys have a set of regulation pole attachments, I'd like to see those if you can. But we again, this is something that's only going to get worse. So we got to get a set of guidelines down. Again, that way the broadband providers know this is the area they got to work in. The owners of the pole know this area they got to work in. Evidently, we don't have that yet, and I'd like to see that something put in there. Because of the fact that as I said earlier, this is the tip of the iceberg. It's going to get much, much worse. So if you can start tomorrow on this, that'd be fine. But again, that's joking. But we need to get on this ASAP because it's only going to get much, much worse.
Yeah, I've taken actually leave. We're in the middle of a Kentucky American Water hearing right now. So if we can just get through this week, I'm happy to meet with stakeholders on Tuesday and Wednesday of next week. And I mean that seriously. If that's as early as we can do it, then we're happy to do it.
And again, I'd like to take another look at, again, what I'm hearing in Scott County is a line of 20, 30, 40 poles. One pole needs to be replaced, and it holds up the whole project. I think we need to take a hard look at saying, okay, we can temporarily attach that, and next week we're going to replace that pole. But right now, it's those things like that are holding up the whole project, and we need to take a hard look at that also. So again, I don't want to be unsafe, but also I want to get these projects out because, again, the clock is ticking, as you know.
Thank you very much, Chairman Pratt. And one of the things, we've had conversations and we just barely scratched the surface on some of those with all the parties involved, is I think when there's a dispute on whether they need to make ready, whatever, how long does that dispute, can that dispute process if they bring it to you? One reason you haven't seen it is how long does it take?
The very maximum, and we put this on ourselves. Our ordinary complaint process doesn't have a deadline, by the way, but we put a deadline on a complaint. I believe this is going from memory of a very large regulation. I think 180 days is the longest that a complaint could last, and that could be as simple as a complaint around a single pole, or that could be a huge case that a utility has failed to follow their rates or their service. I mean, it depends on the complexity of the case, but the maximum that we could go is 180 days in a complaint process before we render a decision. Is that right? Yeah.
Okay, trying to slow that. Well, I would hopefully we have a mechanism, so we'll be in a session soon where we can start doing our things.
Yeah,
but
I'm sorry. 180 days, and then for good cause, if it's again, a utility did it wrong. Sorry. There is an additional sentence that says it could be extended for good cause up to 360 days. But the deadline that's set in the regulation is 180.
Yeah, I'd heard the 360 days before.
Question real fast.
Go ahead.
All right, you said 180 days. What happens if they don't fall within 180 days? Is there any teeth in it?
Yeah, so and sorry, when I was referring to the 180 days, so if there's a problem, somebody can file with us a complaint where instead of it being like an informal conversation, well, we're hearing this, we're seeing this, they would file a complaint with evidence and under oath or affidavit, and we would have to rule on that complaint within 180 days is what the regulation says.
What happens if they haven't done it?
So the complaint would be if they don't file the complaint with us, if the attacher doesn't.
If they file a complaint, they haven't done 180 days, they didn't do what they said it was going to do, is there fines attached? Is there punishment of some sort?
Generally, yeah. So if we find that a utility didn't, this is just general, but under this specific regulation. If the Public Service Commission, after a hearing and due process, issues an order telling a utility to do something, such as fixing the problem identified in a complaint, and the utility violates an order, and the commission finds that it violated the order willfully, I believe their 278-990 allows for a $2,500 fine per day per violation of that willful, not following an order, not following a regulation, not following a rule. So there are teeth in the commission's orders when they're willfully disregarded.
Thanks, sir.
Thank you. And I think what we ought to all try to get, you ought to try to get everybody together. Do you have a mechanism to get them together with us where we can talk about, because there's other issues on how the allocation, when these replacement costs, is it coming out of the grant? Is it coming out of the rate base? How this is being handled. And just from talking to all the individual parties, I think there's a different understanding from some of the pole owners and some of the pole attachers and the PSC on how this is all working. I know there's a pole fund out there, and that may or may not have been tapped. For the big vendors, I don't think money is an issue for them. They want to get it done. For some of the smaller ones, it may be an issue of how this affects their rate base. So
yeah. So two questions that I kind of heard there. Is there a mechanism? We can create an informal process to start having these conversations now that we're hearing that there are problems. The second is as it relates to the cost, and I just want to be clear, we have jurisdiction over public utilities and their rates and service. By statute, we specifically do not have authority or jurisdiction over anything related to broadband. So there's kind of that clear delineation. So there are going to be certain things where there something may come up and we go, that may be an issue. We can highlight that, but it's not an issue that necessarily we can do anything about. That, and so hopefully, as we keep notes and take note of those different issues, we can highlight those for your all's review, insofar as they're completely outside of our jurisdiction.
Okay, thank you very much. So, good. Can I? So I think the meeting's adjourned. Thank you all very much for your attendance. Can I talk to you for just a minute? Wait a second. Yeah, what I'm going to ask is the last topic, we're over time, 2.5 hours. I was going to ask if they would come up here and talk to me individually at the end of this. I think they would probably be glad to do that. And we'll just have an offline conversation on that. And I'm looking forward to talking to you. I don't think it'll take too long, but good. So if we'll do that, and do I hear a motion for adjournment?
So moved.
Thank you.